Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's Sunday Conversation here on Big Country Politics. I'm Manny Diaz. Our special guest this week is Reverend Andrew Penns here at the Curtis House, and also pastor at Valley View Missionary Baptist Church. We are on location this week because this week we are celebrating Juneteenth. It is an official federal holiday in the United States, and it means a lot. Pastor Penns, you are this day, we were talking before our conversation here, and this day is very significant to you, most importantly.
It is very, very significant in several ways. To know of the history and what transpired in 1865, but also in personal way, it's celebrated with me, not so much in a big way in that way, but I had finished my tour, my service, military service in the Army, and was returning home to get back into civilian life.
Juneteenth in 1865, it impacted more than 250,000 African Americans who were informed of their freedom by executive decree that is now known as Juneteenth or Freedom Day. You shared with me that perhaps, someone here in Abilene that lived here in Abilene and that is now since passed was either impacted by that particular day or their family was impacted by that particular day.
Well, the gentleman that lived here in Abilene, his name was Green Cumbie, I think was the last name, Green Cumbie. And a little bit of his history is that he lived here, and it was an adjustment for him to come out of slavery and to have a life of freedom. Several of his relatives that still live here in Abilene, they somewhat talk about his life. I think they more or less would remember from conversation from their mother or their grandmothers of his life living here. I never did know him personally. Just later years, I was able to get a narrative and a picture of him, and also the tentative location where he lived here in Abilene, Texas.
Wow.
Right in this neighborhood, in the Carver community neighborhood.
And he was impacted by the Juneteenth, the Freedom Day.
Yes.
Wow. Looking back at that, it's amazing that our nation has come so far with all that. And, during your time growing up, because throughout the civil rights movement, for African American folks, they were not treated fair, they were not treated right. During your time growing up here in Abilene, was it ever discouraged to not celebrate Juneteenth?
It was never a discouragement not to celebrate. It was more of an encouragement to celebrate because of the significance of Texas from Galveston after the emancipation was signed and freedom was declared. The celebration began. And over the years, I can remember as a young child, as far as maybe back to about 5, 6 years old, how we would celebrate. My grandparents and my parents would come together, and other relatives would come together, and we would celebrate in a big day. It was a rejoicing time. It was a time to feast, to reflect, and to enjoy, and then also to appreciate what we had accomplished in life. And like I say, I was a young child then, but I could look back and see how my grandmother, I was able to be around both my grandmothers and my grandfathers and seeing what they had to accomplish, even though they were not directly in slavery, but at the end of slavery and starting their childhood, and to see how they had progressed and what they had accomplished, mainly with very little education.
Imagine you had 1,000,001 questions for them at that time growing up. What were some of the things that you would ask them about?
I didn't. As a young child, it was only later years after I reached my teen years and adult years, as a young child, we didn't think much about Juneteenth in a way of slavery. We thought more in a way of celebration. You know, we knew what the celebration was about, but there was not a lot of discussion. And especially, I think, from my grandparents, from their perspective, they didn't like to talk about slavery. You know, as I began to get involved with history and began to speak with many elderly that had lived a time of segregation, a time of remembering coming at the tail end of slavery, coming into integration, how tough times were for them. I mean, not being able, even though here in Texas it was now declared freedom, but there was still some hills that had to be climbed. There were still some objectives that they had to persevere against. And then there were some who were able to overcome. Even today, as I do history, as I pastor a congregation, my ultimate objective, my ultimate goal is to teach those and to help those to become greater than myself, to excel, to exceed my children, my grandchildren, to exceed, to become better than even father or mother has accomplished.
It's a good way to put it. Great way to put it. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, more with Pastor Pins here at the Curtis House. This is our Sunday conversation right here on Big Country Politics.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
And welcome back to our Sunday conversation here on Big Country Politics. I'm Manny Diaz. This week we are joined by Reverend Andrew Pins. He is of the Curtis House here in Abilene that just preserves African American culture, and pastor at Valley View Missionary Baptist Church. You've been a pastor for almost 36 years.
Actually, I've pastored the church I'm currently at 36 years, actually 39 years in pastorship.
Wow.
I had a church 3 years prior to the church I'm at now.
So for almost 40 years total.
Almost 40 years of pastoring, I tell you.
That's an amazing thing to do.
Great achievement.
Well, today we're talking, Juneteenth, because Monday this is a celebration that many African Americans refer to as Freedom Day, because on June 19th of 1865, that's when some 250,000 African Americans were informed of their freedom by an executive decree from the United States. Tell me, Pastor Pins, how far has our society come? Obviously, since 1865 to 1965, that was one thing with the Civil Rights Movement, but now from 1965 to 2023, how far has our society advanced of accepting people, certainly culture?
To be real about it, there has been some significant advancements, but there's also been some setbacks. When I really saw a change begin to take place about 1986, progress was beginning to take place. Blacks were beginning to receive better jobs. Also, there was not as much discrimination for housing. And the reason I speak that, I served as the president of the branch, NAACP branch here for 12 years. And I was definitely involved with a lot of the process of discrimination against housing, discrimination against jobs, and then even myself was a product of having to be discriminated because of a position that should have came to me that wasn't given, but given to another person. But it taken a unified front from LULAC, NAACP here in Abilene to come together to start working and speaking up and voicing our concern that more blacks would be hired in city government, more blacks would be hired in county government, and then also to recognize the holiday, MLK holiday, that was already in place but was never actually officially the county or city would close down.
Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing, progress being made at this point, and it's probably fair to say that significant progress has been made. Some progress has been made.
Yes.
In 20 or so years, how do you think the African American will be? Will there still be that discriminatory element that we saw in earlier years? How do you think that'll be as we progress?
Well, there are some resurfacing of discrimination today. And it's done in a more hidden way, more discreet way, but there are still some levels. Yes, it's changing a lot. But also as a black pastor, I'm also finding that our races of people sometimes are more willing to go to the white church when they have excelled than to come to the black church and feel at moments, and I've talked to Hispanic pastors also, that they feel at moments where we're not qualified enough, we have not received the education enough to pastor them since they have advanced.
How do we get past that, though?
How do you get past that?
How do we get past it?
You just have to keep persevering. I'm a prayer warrior. And I know there might be some adamant things said about, well, you're praying and still no results. But I still believe in prayer. And I do know prayer makes a difference and changes things. But it also takes conversation, getting to know people. Juneteenth,
ultimately, what does that mean to you? And how can we continue to keep this day alive for generations to come?
You said a good question there. Keep this alive. I'm now 74 years old, so I'm reaching a level of an age, and there might be others that are older, so well, they're not ready for that. But I'm at a level of age to where I can start sort of settling down to spend more time with my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and then to be able to reflect and have the freedom to go and do what I like to do. I am gratefully elated when I see young blacks here in Abilene that are stepping up, that are taking the mantle and said, we're going to continue to move us forward, but embrace along with other races of people and say, we're going to do this together. Now, will we ever all come together? No. I don't think I'll see it in my generation. I don't think you'll see it in your lifetime. I do believe at some point it will come, but I'm praying with my children. I have biracial grandchildren. I love them to death. They love their granddad to death. I love my sons and all of it makes up to my family. I have Hispanic in my family. I love them all. And if we would embrace that, if we would just come together and move forward together, then our nation, we could say we have a proud nation. And then those forefathers who persevered, such as Lincoln and others who made it possible, and especially in Galveston, Texas, when they signed that emancipation, to say Texas after the Independence Day of 4th of July, you're now finally getting the news that you are free. Are we really free? That question was asked me the other day. Only will we know down the road if we all are really free.
That's a good point. Well, Pastor Penns, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
For Pastor Andrew Penns of the Curtis House, I am Manny Diaz, and this has been another Sunday Conversation right here on Big Country Politics. We'll see you next week.